Yeah, we all think we have all the answers until we actually have children.
Hey, everybody, welcome to the Fractured Faith podcast, a mosaic of belief. This is your co host, Joshua Hopping.
And I'm Angel Ford.
Yes, Angel is back in to the room with us today, which is awesome. Our schedules finally aligned. It's the stars have
Woohoo!
aligned for us today,
Hooray!
which is pretty sweet.
Who knew that being in different time zones and with multiple children that this would be hard to coordinate?
Yes, yes, exactly. And it is the multiple children part right now that we get to really dive in today and talk about.
hmm Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we get to talk about something that I don't think has very much controversy around it at all. I don't even know why we're discussing it. Corporal punishment and do we spank our children? And does God say it's okay?
Yeah,
And are we forever scarring our children if we spank them?
Yeah, this is definitely a, non-controversial topic among conservative evangelicals and fundamentalist Christians of a lot of ways in the cultural deals. If I remember correctly from the scriptures, it says not to spare the rod. So I believe that's
hmm
settled. So we're done, right? The Bible
Yeah.
says it.
Yeah,
I believe it.
yeah, you don't have to read any further than that. Specifically for those of you who don't know, because I don't know addresses either. It's Proverbs 13:24. Uh, that the modern translation of is whoever spares the rod hates their children, but the one who loves their children is careful to discipline them.
Interesting. I actually did not know the address
Yeah.
of that verse, so well done. Well done. As you probably people listening knows, we are being very sarcastic in a lot of our conversations here.
Yeah.
So explain why this would be controversial, and set the stage a little bit for us.
Yeah, so the historical context, right? We read that verse, and the initial interpretation of it is like the rod being like, a staff for correction. And it's this idea of like, oh, it like the hitting, right? Or the spanking, because a lot of parents will kind of justify that. They'll be like, well, I'm not hitting them, I'm spanking them. It's correction, right? And it's like what shepherds do with their sheep. And so by that we feel like not only are we okay to spank our children, but somehow like God has instructed us to spank our children. Which, in a way makes sense, I guess. I'm trying to think like how people land here where it's like kids don't pay attention or listen and they might do something very dangerous, like, run out in front of a car, I think is the most common used thing, and they need to learn and understand that if they don't listen to me, and so we have to take these extreme measures to keep them safe, right? And I truly believe that most parents who engage in spanking their child, like they're not doing it because they're abusive. They're not doing it because they hate their kids or anything. Like they genuinely are parenting in the way that they know best to love and raise their children. So I do want to be a little bit careful when we talk about this, that we're not coming off as like passing this harsh judgment on moms and dads that really are just doing their best.
Yeah, and I think it's also to helpful to understand the American context of this one is that in
hmm
the 50s, 60s, 70s, there was a lot of parenting guides that said that the best way to discipline your children is to use the paddle, the spanking, the belt, the whip, whatever
hmm
instrument that was used in that spanking action. But that was a really big
hmm
thing. And so a lot
Yeah.
of people really grew up knowing that that was the only way or that was the most effective way. And they were
hmm
listening to the children experts and the mental health experts and the various people
Right.
experts of their day. And then there was a kind of a shifting
Right.
of people realized that, whoa, wait a minute, this might not be the best. And for me in my journey, I guess again, because listeners, this is raw. We just picked this topic and like, hey, we're going to riff on this one without actually kind of knowing exactly our stories. Um, but
hmm
for me, I do not spank my kids. I had started to, and I'll tell a little bit more about that history in a minute, but I don't. I'm more in the gentle parenting kind of realm at this point in my life. And
hmm
with my three kids, teenager, a preteen, and then a young grade schooler. So
Yeah, I think similar to you, I have spanked my children before. I felt like absolute trash. I think probably 3 times my children have gotten spanked. And the first time, and I won't name which child, but they did do something like incredibly dangerous that, could have like landed them like very, very hurt. And I did spank them out of fear. It wasn't like anger or anything like that. Like I really thought like, oh my goodness, like to protect my child, I need to do this. In hindsight, like would I do it again? I don't know. Probably not. Um, but and that's why it's like, there's no judgment for parents who have or continue to do or anything. It's like, it's one thing to say do this with your kids. It's another thing to be in that space with them in that moment. Um, yeah.
yeah,
And
under
like going back to the research that you said, I think that's another hard thing with parenting. One of the many hard things with parenting is that, one, they're all like their own like unique little snowflakes, and so there's no like manual of how to raise that child. But when we do go to these experts and research and everything, the research change and the feedback changes, and that's kind of the hard thing about research is that you have to have a lot of guinea pigs and a lot of data samples and a long time to be like, oh, okay, these are the short-term effects and long-term effects, and this is what to do differently. I think about when you were talking about that, like even the crying it out method and how that was like the big thing for a long time. It's just, oh, let him cry him out, sleep train him. And, my pediatrician now was like, that's probably the worst thing we could have ever told parents to do was to tell them to let their babies cry it out.
Yeah, I have nightmares from that one. Like seriously,
Yeah.
I think I totally ruined my oldest kid, and even to this day, I'm
Mm,
like, oh, but yeah, that so a couple points on there really is one is when we think about you said every kid's different, every family's different, every culture's
hmm.
different. If we think about raising
Yeah.
kids culturally, one of my research into really getting deeper into my own heritage as a Cherokee is realizing that the way they looked at kids and raising is vastly different than my German and British ancestors and how they did it and how places and we a lot of time we don't even take that into consideration. We just have this blanket kind of the scientific method. We're just going to call all kids across all cultures, all places, all the same, and it doesn't work that way. And then, like you
Yeah.
said, things change. And so, what was happening, experts from a couple of decades ago is no longer this. And so, it gets really complicated. It gets really complicated.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
so, and just to we kind of dive in there. I do want to kind of go back and touch something that you said before, which is no shame or no guilt. Is if you are spanking, listening to this deal again, no guilt, no shame. We will call out abuse when abuse is. It can turn into abuse. Gentle parenting can be
Hmm.
just as abusive in other areas as people who do
Hmm.
spank. There is no correlation between your parenting style and abuse. And so I do want to make that clear for our
Hmm.
listeners. We're going to unpack this from our experiences understanding that where you listen to the spirit, listen to your kids and the people surrounding to you. So, but this is just our
Right.
experiences coming in there. So, kind of had a little bit of ground rules there as I was thinking about it.
Right.
So, yeah. So let me. I want to tell a little bit of my background, the story, and kind of on this topic. I think I had it written down. It's I think I probably had a lot of stories a lot of people have. So for me growing up. I was spanked as a kid, and that was really seen as the only tools in a toolbox. Really was spanking. I had two aunts that I had multiple aunts, but there's two aunts specifically that I grew up fairly close with, and one aunt spanked her kids all the time, like really borderline on abuse, if not
Mm,
abusive. As a child, like you really wasn't fully aware of the extent, but looking backwards, you're like, oh, okay. My parents weren't was reserved for those big disciplinarial things. Most of it was, hey, you have 3 warnings, you need to like back down or stop, or there's going to be some consequences. But then we had one aunt that was just all the time, and then we had another one that was almost never spanked her kids at all, and it really was more I guess we would call it more gentle parenting at this point. And I remember those two
hmm.
models being put up in front of me. And I even remember as I get into college and stuff, I remember saying, like, well, not spanking doesn't work. And overspanking doesn't work because I saw the results of both those cousins
Hmm.
and the things. So this is what works is the middle ground. And that was
Hmm.
the mentality when I got married. That was the mentality that I had because that was the pictures or my
Hmm.
experiences. So when my oldest, who
Hmm.
was adopted, came into it, that's what I took in it. I'm like, hey, this is going to be I'm going to spank. This was going on. We're going to cry it out because that's what all the people telling me. My own
Hmm.
parents were telling me that. Well, hey, as a kid, you need to cry it out. Now, it really went bad, and I think for me and my wife, because we actually tried it for a couple of months of trying to have him cried out as a young kid in his room, trying to, cry as a baby. But he was adopted. I think I actually gave him abandonment issues already from the lack of just, trying to attachment in places because, he bring me into
Hmm.
there. And we found out that my oldest has opposition defiance disorder, which is he doesn't
Hmm.
back down. He never backed. I don't think he's ever had a fight that he's ever backed away. He has no running. He has only fight instincts. And which makes it really hard as a parent when you're trying to discipline him because then
Yeah.
he's going to fight you. And so when you have this little kid that you're going to have to take a paddle to it and he's fighting, he's not being submissive at all. He's fighting you and then you have to try to physically hold him down. I mean, talk about wanting to throw up. Even right now, I kind of want to throw up in my just spew all over the
Mm.
computer because he's just like, how as a parent am I supposed to like this is not right? And yet that was the only
Right.
tool that we had in the
Hmm.
toolbox. That was it. There was zero other tools in all of the adoption classes I went through, all the church classes I went through, all the parenting things I've ever heard in my life only had do not spare the rod. That was the
Hmm.
only
Yeah.
thing taught to me.
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, I have so much empathy for that, Joshua, because even from like the mental health perspective, ODD is not easy. Like, most clinicians know how to work with anxiety and trauma and depression and stuff. Like, ODD is like a very like niche diagnosis to be trained in because it is such like a specialized like diagnosis and learning all the tools to really give the parents to be able to do that. So, 2025, it's hard to find those resources. Those resources do exist now. Even in the Treasure Valley, we have resources to help and like programs to walk parents through that. But if you don't really know what you're looking at and what you're doing and all that stuff, like on top of just parenting being difficult, like ODD is very, very difficult. So, and I want to bring that up, like any audience member who's listening who like has a kiddo with that, like you're not a bad parent. Like your kids, like they have a real mental health disorder, and it is hard, and you have so much empathy from anyone working in the mental health community. And there are resources.
Yeah, damn, and I'm so glad for that. And I'll mention some of the stuff that helped me along the way as well. Especially, I think I have two biological kids, and they have benefited from the mistakes, unfortunately, of my oldest. Then and my oldest is in a good spot now. So for those listening, it's definitely good, but it has been a journey and it'll continue to be a journey in a lot of ways. But
Hmm.
it's just like getting those tools and I'll back up for a minute is I want to say this is that I have got so much empathy now from any parents that I see in the grocery stores or the aisles and their kids are
Hmm.
screaming or running away because I have to
Hmm.
admit in my early 20s I used to be very judgmental because I'm like, aren't they bad parents? Like, well, can't you
Yes.
control your kids?
Yes.
And like, what you
Hmm.
doing? And then I became that parent, and I became
Yes.
that one where that
Yes.
kid was uncontrollable, and then like grabbing them and haul them out of stuff. I'm like, I get it. Okay, God. Oops.
Mhm.
Grace,
Yeah.
grace to
You know,
people.
we all think, yeah, we all think we have all the answers until we actually have children. Whenever I go to the grocery store and I see, it's usually the mom, right? When I see a mom like trying to wrangle her kids and they're just being all unruly, like if I get a chance, I do like to lean over and be like, "You're doing a good job," and just keep at it because it's not easy.
Keep up the faith, parents. Keep up the faith. Um,
Yeah.
so,
I did want us to be back a little bit to that Bible verse really quickly. Um, where the spare the rod, because I think that is probably like the most commonly like reference back. The rod is like it's a metaphor, right? Because
mm,
we're out of Psalms, right?
right.
Um, but it's not like if you think about like a shepherd with a rod, right? Like they don't just hit their sheep all the time, right? Like a more like correct translation alignment with that is just strong, consistent discipline. And spanking, if you think about it, isn't really discipline, it's punishment, right? Like it's a reaction to a kid's behavior versus being proactive to the behavior and having like strong, consistent like guidance and discipline and things like that. Like that's all like in the front end of parenting. The spanking is the reactionary punishment for when they're not getting in line, but the shepherd doesn't just take out the rod only when their sheep are being naughty.
Mm,
Like it's constantly there, and it's not always painful. Like there's a lot of like security and comfort that the sheep like feel when they see their shepherd with their rod because they know that they're protected. And so if your like type of parenting only makes your kids fearful and anxious and like this timid submissiveness, then that's not adhering to the scriptures.
yeah. And I think 2 points to that one is we're not sheep. So we're
Right,
not.
right. It's
That's
a
the important
metaphor.
piece.
It's a metaphor, people.
It is a minute. Yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
discipline is true. Now, and I will say this because when I first learned about gentle parenting, which is basically when we're talking about gentle parenting, is the way I see it defined is where you're using your words to be able to discipline them. You're using your actions to be able to discipline them. Discipline them is still happening. Whether that would
Hmm.
be, sitting in the corner or sitting down with them or other consequences. There's always I think there's consequences, there's good and bad consequences to every action that we
Yeah.
have, but there's still discipline. It does not mean that anything goes. Because I think there's this
Hmm.
common misconception, or at least there is a
Yes.
stereotype that has been branded from those who do the spanking world, who will say that outward to the other people, say, well, they just let them go wild. And it's like, no, they don't let
Yeah.
them go wild. They just have a different way of looking. It's not corporal punishment, but there's still punishment. There's still consequences. There's still discipline that's happening. Is happening in a
Right.
different way, and you just got to
Yeah.
look for it and see it. So I do want to make sure that that is known, because again, that gets missing. Just like I would say on the corporate punishment side is there's gentle spanking, and you would just say what they will say. Well, I'm not, places, but discipline still happens
Right.
regardless.
Right. Yeah. I was thinking about that. Every time we enter in this world of dichotomy, it's like that doesn't truly exist. There's gray in here. Just like spanking doesn't automatically mean you're abusing your children. Gentle parenting doesn't mean that your children are just walking all over you. Like there's so much gray and nuance in between here.
Exactly. And for me as a parent, it has definitely opened up, and I think it's been a closer bond to my kids. So some of the stuff I do and I've done is as they're getting, if they do get in trouble, is I don't really have timeouts where they go sit in the room or sit in a corner somewhere by themselves. I have them come sit with me
Hmm.
next to me because I've come to realize that a
Hmm.
lot of times they're acting out is usually a symptom of something deeper happening inside them. So if we dig a little deeper into what's happening,
Hmm.
there's a fear or concern, or there's something in this little human that is really wanting to share out. In our previous episode, I talked about raising demon children, and we really were talking about this idea of against total depravity, and this idea that children are demonic or evil from the very beginning, which I totally disagree with. Go back and listen to that episode for listeners doing it is I think these children are little human beings made in the image of God, and they are struggling and they want to do what's best. They generally want to be able to honor us as parents, and they want to be able to have that to make us happy. And once you have that understanding of that, they
Hmm.
want to actually make us happy and they want to do it, then when they do something incorrectly, there you got to find out why. Maybe this is ADHD. This is like this a stray thought that
Hmm.
hit into their head and they just reach over and knock that glass or they did something and it wasn't intentional. It was just
Hmm.
like they had uncontrolled thoughts
Hmm.
that just went boom right in it. Which, if I'm honest, how many times have I done something similar, even as an adult, of where I just don't think
Right.
about it? I just do it, and then I'm like, crap, why did I say that? Or
Right.
why did I do that? Oh, well, my kids are the same way. So that shift in
Hmm.
mentality, I think, was really big for me to really understand what's happening with that.
Yeah. Isn't that just the most humbling experience when your children start mirroring you? Both from just like
Yes.
learning and watching, but also the biological aspect. It's like, oh, wow, that's me. Okay.
Totally, totally. It does. And you're like, oh, oops, I got to work on that. Or that's really
Yeah,
cool
sorry, I
sometimes.
did that. I did that to you. Sorry, kid.
Exactly. Um, it definitely is a humbling experience in that one. Now, but it is, again, I think this as a parent that has really opened my eyes up to really be able to see these things. And there was two authors that helped me on this journey, and I didn't read everything with them, but some of their processes has been helpful because this is you guys know me. I read a lot. I do it. One was Dr. Tim Kimball. He's a Christian author and parenting person. I guess I don't know what his degree was in. Um, but he actually has this deal about grace-based parenting and raising kids right. And one of the things in his class, and this was back up, this was the only parenting class ever offered to me as a church that actually taught me something
Mm,
well. And so I will highly recommend
mm,
this. And it was in a church. I think
hmm.
my son was about 3 or 4, and I was dying and trying to figure out what to do with it because I was thought my kid was a demonic being that was out to destroy it. He was willfully challenging everything I had. I had no concept of
Mm,
opposition defiance. I had no concept of any of this stuff. I was just struggling. And to make matters worse, I
yeah.
was the senior pastor of a church at the time, and one of the youngest members of the church, quite frankly. And so we had a lot of these parents and grandparents that had did it through the rod, and they're like, "You should just spank him more and discipline him more. He needs to sit still." Because they didn't have a concept of ADHD and ODD, and of course I didn't either. To be honest, I was I had no do. I really wish I
Sure.
knew. Wish I knew you then, Rachel. Um, just to set the stage for like I think a lot of our listeners are just kind of isolated out there in the middle of nowhere. And I'm expected as a pastor, your kids are supposed to be disciplined in an order. I think there was like Timothy,
Mm,
there's that verse
yeah.
about your family has to be right. So if you have this little kid running around in the sanctuary or running around and when you call them back and they talk back to you, that's a lot of shame in a small country church in the
Yeah.
evangelical world. And so I was
Yeah.
wearing a lot of shame and guilt, and my wife even more so than me, because I think a lot of unfairly, I would say, unfairly, a lot of times the mothers get more shame for young kids than the fathers do.
Right. Right.
Um,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden, this church that we were connected, not the church I was pastoring, but a sister church, a bigger church, had this parenting class. And Dr. Kimball was actually in a grace-based parenting, and I'm like, I was desperate for anything. So we drove an hour
Mm,
down into the to Boise in the area place where we're living, and we went to this parenting class. And it really was one of those life-changing kind of things in my head, just like, oh my goodness, I am not raising demonic kids. I am raising humans made in the image of God. And I need to change my
right.
parameters of how I'm living with this kid and realizing we didn't even get into the fullness of ODD and all that stuff. It was just changing my theology and how I'm doing it and realizing that I should
Yeah.
have grace for this kid. And that was a big of my starting
Hmm.
my journey.
Yeah. As you were talking, I was thinking, I really appreciated like my relationship with God after having children because it's not like an exact right because he's, our Heavenly Father, but that concept of like a parent and child and how you love your children and the kind of grace, like you said, like the grace that like God gives us and the grace that we give our kids. Because, I was thinking like the Bible has kind of outlines of like how to behave and all that stuff, but there's not a whole lot of like, um, like what to do with your children sort of thing. But the whole relationship between you and God is an example of good parenting. And so if it's like, how am I going to treat my children in this? It's like, well, how does God want to treat me in like this, like either in disobedience or not understanding or guidance and correction. And I think that's where it's really important to just like lean back into the spirit and his guidance and how you raise your kids because they are also individualized. And so the way how God interacts with me is not the same as how he interacts with you, Joshua. So there is guidance that he's willing to give us to help us raise our children well.
So agreed, Angels, agreed so much. And even thinking about that as well is that when I mess up as a follower of Jesus, I am convinced that Jesus pushes
Hmm.
in and stays close to me. So why would I, as a parent,
Yeah,
push my kids away when they do something wrong? Right? In other words, I
right,
understand that
right.
there's time for aloneness, and there's times where I get so mad I need to have
Hmm.
space. Okay, so I'm not talking about that. There's time where you gotta go
Hmm.
count to 10 and go take a walk and come back. Or as a kid, you might need to,
Right. So, sometimes mommy needs a timeout.
exactly, exactly. But as ground, as is again, no shame to people who do this, but this for me, a lot of times is if I will go sit with my kids in their room as that grounding and separate them from one another and then go sit with them because I think they need
Hmm.
somebody. They need their dad. They need their mom. Just like I need my Heavenly
Right,
Father, just like I need Jesus and the Spirit with me. And also understanding that I want
right,
to have that relationship with my kids, just again, like Jesus. And I don't want to ever lose that relationship. And this, it goes back to even my priorities. And this is where I've shifted my priorities over the years as I've come into this one. In that, at this point in my life, I would rather have a relationship with my kids than be seen as having
mm,
everything together. So I would rather have my kids be
sure,
able to trust me and be with me, even if they may act out and be, do something that I disagree with. I still want to maintain that relationship. Now, that's not to say there's not discipline or not
right,
consequences. Again, guys, I know people take this to extremes, but and I'm thinking right now of my teenager at the
hmm,
moment is that I'm like, I have a relationship with him still. And there was a point in time when I wasn't sure if I would have a relationship with him through some of the struggles he went through.
yeah,
And to the point that Sharon here is like, there was some times where I was afraid of self-harming. And he actually had some self-harming. And you're
hmm,
like, hey, I want to make sure he is still here with me, which means I got to lean
right,
into him, not push him away. And that means a lot
right,
gentler of a parenting technique. And that means letting go some stuff. And this is where the other resource I had, which is Dr. Ross Green. He's a non I don't know his faith background actually, but he's an associate clinical professor at Harvard. He's one of those guys, but he has this plan, this ideal of I think how I didn't read as much as I listened to it through my wife. My wife was the one who really kind of hit on this one. But it's ideal of there are some things you need to be able to distinguish what's really important, and what's not, and some things you got to let slide. There are some things that are not worth that fight,
right,
and some things that are worth it. And again,
right.
there's this consequences and safety and all those parameters. Okay, but there's some things that's not really. Is it really worth the fight to figure out what your kids wear? I don't think so. My personal bills, I don't really care what they wear. So I'm not going to fight that battle. I'm going to fight
Yeah.
some other battles, right? And that was helpful for me to be able to actually, again, put those parameters around them, going like, this is what's important and this is not. I'm going to emphasize work on the importance part and let God handle the other parts, which I think the way even God works on us a little bit.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
It's been working out. That's
Yeah.
my story. I don't know. Ask me again in another 15 years how it goes.
Right. Right. You know, I was talking a little bit about, we're gonna go into parenting styles and kind of tapping into like the psychology of everything. I do not specialize in children and all that stuff, but I do know like the general understanding of the research behind child rearing and everything. First with spanking, because that's what we're talking about. There is a lot of research in the negative impacts that it will have on your children if consistently spanking, right? Like I got spanked a few times as a kid. I'm fine, like I don't think my children who got spanked a couple of times, like they're now going to develop these things. But there's so much research about how it causes increased aggression and anxiety and damaging trust with uh, their parent or caregiver or whoever is like consistently engaging in spanking. But even like you said, like with the timeouts and stuff, like sending the kids away. Children learn from their caregivers how to react, how to emotionally regulate. Like all of their learning comes from modeling. And so if kids are emotionally dysregulated and you send them away into their room, they don't have a model to understand how to regulate. They just know like, oh, having big emotions is bad and I'm isolated now because I have them. So actually what the kiddos learn, if that's like the consistent parenting style that you engage in, is that they're just not allowed to feel, which has
Mm,
a lot of
wow.
negative consequences when they become adults, because they never learn how to regulate their emotions. Because
That's
kids don't infer, they don't interpret, like they don't recognize like, oh, they're sending me up to my room because I'm misbehaving and now I have to like self-regulate and come back down. All they're getting is the face value, which is I had a big emotion. The consequence is I'm now isolated. So the solution to this equation is to not have big emotions because we are hardwired as humans to be pack animals. That's why we have towns and cities and everything. It's like we're not wired to be isolated. That's why solitary confinement is literally torture, right? Like
right.
we suffer when we're alone, and so we will do anything to feel like we fit in, right? And there's so much other research that goes behind in like the sociology world of like fitting in. But yeah, when your kids are feeling big emotions and caregiver, if you're like in a space where you can model for them of how to regulate and showing them that it's okay to have these big feelings, um, then do that. Because the for that, I will say the research is strongly supported that like you need to model that for your kids. Now, if you're not in a headspace to do that, and like I said, sometimes mommy needs a timeout, right?
Yeah.
And being like, hey, I gotta go take some deep breaths and then I'm gonna come back and then we're gonna work through that. That's fine. I much rather a parent center themselves first and then address the issue than them trying to address the issue, not being centered and then like exploding.
Yeah, that doesn't work well. Learn that lesson. That's fascinating, though. I didn't realize that full on the full impact of the research. It makes sense, but I
Hmm.
must admit I had not went down that road, and so that's very cool to be able to share that. Thank you.
Yeah.
So our last, as we wrap up here, listeners, I'm hopefully you enjoyed this conversation. And like I said, there's lots of ways. Parenting is a multifaceted thing. Lots of
Hmm.
cultures, lots of people, lots of individuals. I think the takeaways that I would share with you our listeners will be one is seeing your kids as somebody made in the image of God, that they are little
Hmm.
humans and
Yeah.
the other one with that one is we'll kind of lean into them the way that the spirit leans into us and whatever that looks like. And I think that to me is a big takeaway. And also realizing that if somebody has a different parenting style than you, that's okay. Like let's not try to shame or force or be able to kind of really, hurt that other parent in that process, those kids. And I'd say this again, this is me coming from a place of where I used to be judgmental And then I got kids, and then I realized that, and I found myself being the one, the blunt of all the judgment. And it was hard, and yet I'm really glad that I did shift it because I actually have a relationship with my kids still, and and
Hmm.
I and I really appreciate that one. But just as I guess on behalf of the parents who have been shamed, please don't do that to us. We have hard kids.
Yeah. Yeah.
Love us, please. Help pray for us. Give us the grace because it's not easy up here. Some of these kids are definitely more challenged than others. So just keep that in
Yeah.
mind before you throw stones, please.
Yeah. Especially if you live in a glass house, don't do that.
Yeah, totally. Excellent. Well, Angel, I thank you so much for this chat. This was great. I'm glad our schedules got connected. And listeners,
Yeah.
make sure that you subscribe. We're on the YouTube podcast, where I think most of you are listening to this episode. We're also on Spotify and on Apple Podcast. So there's other ones there.
Hmm.
If you subscribe, that way you keep getting all episodes. We try to get it out every 2 weeks. I know sometimes I've been a little bit lax with that timeline, but I'm trying my best. Life is definitely interesting. But if you subscribe to either one of those platforms, you will make sure that you actually get the notified when we have a new episode coming out. It also helps us in being able to track our followers and what's going on, which is great. And then if you do have any comments, I do read those comments. So I appreciate those who do make some comments there. And you always feel free, you can actually reach out, leave a comment if you have a topic or suggestion as far as maybe a topic you want to listen to or a question that you have, and we'll be happy to respond.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Thank you guys again. I appreciate it.